Well, well, well. Look who's smiling now. Look who's standing in the wreckage of their little scheme with both hands in their pockets and not a scratch on their soul. You magnificent, patient, dangerously perceptive creature, welcome back. Or should I say, welcome to the moment they've been dreading since the very first lie left their lips. Because if you're still here, still watching, still breathing after everything they orchestrated behind your back, then congratulations, you already know the punchline. And before we go deeper real quick, this channel got demonetized 2 months ago and it's still demonetized, but I didn't stop. I wrote a book for you called The Joker Doctrine, a complete guide to self-improvement and human psychology. Supporting it keeps this movement alive. Link in the description. Now back to your moment. They just realized you knew all along. Every whisper, every plot, every fake smile, every calculated betrayal, you saw it all. You clocked it the moment it started. And you said nothing. You let them perform. You let them scheme. You let them believe they were the smartest ones in the room. And now they're standing in the spotlight of their own foolishness, blinking, stammering, sweating, because the person they thought was asleep was wide awake the entire time. And oh, the embarrassment. Oh, the humiliation. Oh, the absolute psychological devastation of realizing that the person you were trying to outsmart was 10 steps ahead of you from day one. Let's rewind for a moment, because I want you to feel the full weight of what just happened. They came into your life with a plan. Not a vague idea, not a passing thought, a plan. A calculated, rehearsed, carefully constructed strategy to manipulate you, mislead you, and ultimately control you. They studied your patterns. They learned your weaknesses. They identified your blind spots, or at least the blind spots they assumed you had. And then they went to work, slowly, methodically, patiently, dripping poison into your ear 1 drop at a time, thinking you'd never taste it, thinking you'd never notice the bitterness beneath their sweetness, thinking you were too trusting, too naive, too emotionally invested to see through the performance. But here's where their entire operation collapsed. Here's where the foundation of their scheme cracked right down the middle. You weren't blind, you were watching. You weren't naive, you were cataloging. You weren't trusting blindly. You were giving them rope, enough rope to reveal exactly who they were, enough rope to hang their own credibility, enough rope to tie themselves into knots they'll never untangle. And the beautiful, devastating truth is this. They never once suspected you knew, not once. They looked at your calm face and saw ignorance. They looked at your silence and saw submission. They looked at your patience and saw weakness. But what they were actually looking at was strategy. Pure, refined, ice-cold strategy. You were the chess player who saw the checkmate 12 moves ahead and still moved the pawns slowly, deliberately, letting them believe they were winning, letting them celebrate premature victories, letting them high-five each other in their little circles, whispering about how they'd finally gotten one over on you. And you sat there, quiet, composed, watching their circus with the detachment of someone who already knows how the story ends, because you did know, you always knew, from the very first inconsistency, from the very first story that didn't add up, from the very first time their eyes said one thing and their mouth said another. You caught it, you filed it away, you let it simmer, and you waited. Not because you were scared, not because you were unsure, but because you understood something they never will. Timing is everything. And your timing, your patience, your ability to hold the truth like a loaded weapon without pulling the trigger, that's what makes you dangerous, in ways they'll never comprehend. Now think about what that means for their psychology. For months, maybe years, they operated under the assumption that they were the puppet master, that they were pulling your strings, that you were dancing to their tune without even knowing the music was playing. That belief gave them confidence. It gave them power. It gave them a sense of superiority that fueled every interaction, every conversation, every calculated move. And now, in one shattering moment of realization, all of that has been ripped away. The puppet master just discovered there were no strings. The chess player just realized they were playing against themselves. The hunter just became the hunted. And the look on their face, that frozen, hollow, gut-punched expression when it finally clicked, that's not just embarrassment, that's an identity crisis. Because they didn't just lose a game. They lost the version of themselves that believed they were clever enough to fool you. They lost the narrative that kept their ego intact. They lost the one thing that made them feel powerful, the illusion that they were smarter than you. And now that illusion is shattered, permanently, irreversibly, catastrophically, and they can't put it back together no matter how hard they try. Let's talk about your silence, because that's the weapon they never saw coming. In a world where everyone reacts, where everyone defends, where everyone fires back the moment they feel attacked, you did something terrifying. You said nothing. You watched them lie, and you didn't correct them. You watched them scheme, and you didn't confront them. You watched them build their little house of cards, and you didn't blow it down. Not because you couldn't, but because you understood that the most devastating response to a liar isn't exposure, it's patience. It's letting them build their entire world on a foundation of deception, and then watching them realize, on their own, in their own time, that you knew the whole time. That's not revenge. That's not manipulation. That's mastery. That's the kind of psychological discipline that most people will never achieve, because most people can't sit with the truth without speaking it. Most people can't watch injustice without screaming. Most people can't endure the discomfort of knowing they're being played without flipping the table. But you turned that discomfort into fuel. You turned that knowledge into armor. You turned that silence into the loudest statement anyone has ever made. And now they're drowning in that silence. Because your silence wasn't empty. It was loaded. Every time you smiled when they lied, it was a bullet they didn't know was chambered. Every time you nodded when they manipulated, it was a page being added to a record they didn't know existed. Every time you stayed calm when they expected you to break, it was another nail in the coffin of their credibility. They thought your silence meant you were fooled. But your silence meant you were finished collecting evidence. You were finished watching their performance. You were finished giving them the space to reveal every ugly corner of who they truly are. And now that the curtain has fallen, now that the lights are on, now that they're standing naked in the truth they tried so hard to hide, they can't blame anyone but themselves. Because you didn't expose them, they exposed themselves. You just gave them the stage. You just held the spotlight. You just waited for the final act. And what an act it was. The moment they realized you knew, the moment they saw it in your eyes, the moment the truth hit them like a freight train, every ounce of confidence they ever had evaporated. Every smirk they ever wore melted. Every whisper they ever shared became a scream echoing back at them in the voice of their own stupidity. Here's what makes this even more devastating for them. They can't accuse you of playing dirty. They can't call you manipulative. They can't paint you as the villain. Because you didn't do anything. You didn't scheme. You didn't plot. You didn't retaliate. You simply observed. You simply noticed. You simply remembered. And then you simply existed with that knowledge, peacefully, calmly, without malice, without vengeance, without the need to weaponize what you knew. And that's what terrifies them the most. Because a person who retaliates, they can handle that. A person who fights back, they can prepare for that. A person who screams and confronts, they have a playbook for that. But a person who knows everything and says nothing. A person who watches every betrayal with steady eyes and a steady heart. A person who holds the receipts but never presents them. That kind of person is unpredictable. That kind of person is uncontrollable. That kind of person is untouchable. And that's exactly what you are. Untouchable. Not because you built walls, but because you built awareness. And awareness, real awareness, is the one fortress no liar can penetrate. Now let's talk about the moment. The exact moment they realized you knew. Because that moment, that specific instant in time, is burned into their memory forever. Maybe it was a look. Maybe it was a single sentence you dropped so casually, so effortlessly, that it took them 3 seconds to realize what you just said. Maybe it was a question you asked that was so precise, so surgically targeted, that they couldn't breathe for a full 5 seconds. Maybe it was the way you smiled when they expected you to cry. Maybe it was the way you walked away when they expected you to beg. Whatever it wasn't dramatic, it wasn't loud, it wasn't theatrical. It was quiet, controlled, almost gentle. And that's what made it absolutely devastating. Because they were prepared for an explosion. They were braced for a confrontation. They had their defenses ready, their excuses rehearsed, their counterattacks loaded. But you didn't give them a war, you gave them a mirror. And what they saw in that mirror destroyed them more than any argument ever could. They saw a fool, not you, them. They saw someone who spent months, maybe years, constructing an elaborate deception, only to discover that the person they were deceiving was watching the construction the entire time, taking notes, shaking their head, and waiting for the building to collapse on its own. Imagine that level of humiliation. Imagine the psychological freefall. Imagine spending every ounce of your energy trying to outsmart someone, only to discover they were never competing with you. They were above you, not arrogantly, not boastfully, but naturally, effortlessly. The way an eagle doesn't compete with pigeons, it just flies at a different altitude. And that's what happened here. You weren't playing their game because you were playing a completely different one, a longer one, a deeper one. A game they didn't even know existed until the final move was made. And now they're replaying every interaction in their head, every conversation, every text message, every phone call, every meeting. They're scanning for the moment you first caught on. They're searching for the tell, the slip, the crack in your composure that should have revealed you knew. And they can't find it, because there wasn't one. Your composure wasn't a mask, it was mastery. Your calm wasn't an act, it was architecture. You built your response to their betrayal the way a sculptor builds a masterpiece, slowly, intentionally, with every unnecessary piece chipped away until only the truth remained. And that truth, standing there in full view for everyone to see, is the most beautiful and brutal thing they've ever witnessed. And here's the part that will haunt them the longest. They can't undo it. They can't go back and rerun the deception with better strategy. They can't erase the fact that you saw through them completely, totally, without a single doubt. Every future interaction they have with anyone will be colored by this experience. Every new scheme, every new manipulation, every new performance will carry the shadow of this failure, because you didn't just catch them, you showed them that they're catchable. You proved that their mask isn't as convincing as they thought. You demonstrated that someone out there, you, can see the real them behind the performance. And for a person whose entire identity is built on deception, that knowledge is a life sentence. They'll never feel safe in their lies again. They'll never feel confident in their masks again. They'll never look at another human being without wondering, do they know too? Do they see through me? Am I as transparent as I was with the person who watched me for months and never said a word? That paranoia, that creeping, suffocating awareness that their game has been exposed, that's the gift you gave them, not out of cruelty, but out of inevitability. Because when you try to fool someone who's wiser than you, this is always how it ends. Always. Let's talk about foolishness, because that word doesn't even begin to cover what they're feeling right now. Foolish is forgetting your keys. Foolish is tripping on a flat surface. What they're experiencing is something far deeper, far more corrosive, far more permanently damaging to their sense of self. They're experiencing the realization that they were the joke in a room where they thought they were the comedian. They walked around with this inflated sense of cleverness, this puffed up confidence that they were pulling off the performance of a lifetime. They whispered to their allies about how clueless you were. They celebrated in their group chats. They shared knowing glances across rooms, congratulating each other on how well the deception was going. And now every single one of those moments has been rewritten. Every whisper now sounds stupid. Every celebration now feels hollow. Every knowing glance now looks pathetic. Because the person they were mocking The person they thought was in the dark was actually the one holding the flashlight. They illuminated nothing. You illuminated everything. And now their entire social circle is watching this unfold. The people they bragged to about fooling you are now watching them get fooled by their own arrogance. The allies they recruited are now distancing themselves because nobody wants to be associated with someone who got outplayed this badly. And here's the domino effect they never anticipated. It's not just that they look foolish to you, they look foolish to everyone. Because the moment people found out you knew all along, the entire narrative shifted. Suddenly, you're not the victim, you're the strategist. Suddenly, you're not the naive one, you're the perceptive one. Suddenly, you're not the person who got played, you're the person who let someone play themselves. And that reframe, that complete inversion of the story, is devastating for them on every level because they can't control it, they can't spin it. They can't add context or nuance that makes them look better. The facts are the facts. They tried to deceive you. You saw through it. You stayed quiet. And now they look exactly like what they are. Amateurs. Pretenders. People who thought they were playing chess when they were actually playing checkers against a grandmaster who was reading a book while they made their moves. That image, that mental picture of them sweating and scheming while you casually observed with full knowledge of their every move, is now permanently etched into the minds of everyone who knows the story. And nothing, absolutely nothing, will ever erase it. They can apologize, they can explain, they can justify, they can rewrite history in 100 different ways, but the image remains. The fool remains, the lesson remains, and you remain unbothered, untouched, and undeniably superior in every way that matters. Now, let's talk about what this does to their relationships. Because the fallout doesn't stop with you. It ripples outward into every corner of their life. The people who trusted them are now questioning that trust. The people who believed their version of events are now revising their opinions. The people who took their side are now wondering if they were manipulated too. Because if this person could spend months, years, running a deception this elaborate and still get caught, what else have they been lying about? What other performances have they been giving? What other people have they been fooling or trying to fool? That seed of doubt, once planted, grows fast. And it doesn't just grow in one direction. It spreads into their friendships, their professional relationships, their family dynamics. Everywhere they've ever worn a mask, people are now looking more closely. People are now paying attention. People are now doing exactly what you did, watching, waiting, noticing. And for someone who relies on deception to function, that level of scrutiny is suffocating. They can feel the walls closing in. They can feel the trust eroding. They can feel the ground shifting beneath their carefully constructed life. And they have nobody to blame but themselves, because you didn't tell anyone. You didn't campaign against them. You didn't go on a revenge tour. You simply existed with the truth. And the truth, once it's out, does its own work. It doesn't need your help. It doesn't need your anger. It doesn't need your energy. It just needs to exist. And it does. Loudly, permanently, mercilessly. This is the part most people miss. This is the lesson buried beneath the surface of this entire experience. The power wasn't in knowing. The power was in not reacting to what you knew. Because knowing is easy. Reacting is easy. Confronting is easy. Screaming the truth from the rooftops the moment you discover it, that's the easy path. That's what 99% of people would do. They'd catch the first lie and immediately blow the whistle. They'd spot the first manipulation and instantly start a war. They'd sense the first betrayal and immediately burn the bridge. But you didn't do any of that. You chose the harder path, the path of restraint, the path of observation, the path of strategic patience. You absorbed the discomfort of knowing you were being betrayed, and you didn't flinch. You carried the weight of their deception on your shoulders, and you didn't buckle. You sat across from people who were actively trying to destroy you, and you smiled. Not because you were weak, not because you were in denial, but because you understood that premature reaction is the enemy of permanent victory. You knew that the moment you reacted, you'd give them what they wanted. An excuse, a reason to paint you as the aggressor, a justification for their behavior, a way to flip the script and make themselves the victim, and you refused to give them that satisfaction. So instead of reacting, you redirected. Instead of confronting, you collected. Instead of fighting, you flourished. And that's what drove them absolutely insane. Because they needed your reaction. They were counting on it. Their entire strategy depended on you being emotional, impulsive, predictable. They needed you to lose your temper so they could say, "See? Look how unstable they are." They needed you to make accusations so they could say, "See? Look how paranoid they are." They needed you to break down so they could say, "See? Look how weak they are." But you didn't give them any of it. You gave them nothing. Absolute zero. And in that nothing, in that vacuum of reaction, they lost all their power. Because manipulation only works when the target responds the way the manipulator expects. And you didn't respond at all. You rewrote the rules. You changed the game. You made their playbook obsolete. And now they're standing there with a strategy designed for a person who doesn't exist. A version of you they invented in their heads. A character they wrote for you in their little drama. But you refused the role. You tore up the script. You walked off their stage and you built your own. A stage where you're the director, the writer, and the star. And they're not even in the audience anymore. They're outside, looking through the window, watching you thrive. And they can't get in. The discipline you showed, the restraint you exercised, the composure you maintained, these aren't small things. These are extraordinary things. These are the things that separate people who survive from people who conquer. Because surviving means getting through the fire. Conquering means walking out of the fire, holding the ashes of every lie they told, every mask they wore, every scheme they built, and using those ashes as fertilizer for your own growth. That's what you did. You didn't just get through it. You grew through it. You became sharper, more aware, more resilient, more discerning. Every lie they told taught you to recognize deception faster. Every manipulation they attempted taught you to identify patterns more clearly. Every betrayal they executed taught you to value your own judgment above anyone else's performance. They thought they were breaking you, but they were training you. They thought they were weakening you, but they were forging you. They thought they were making you vulnerable, but they were making you invincible. And now you stand on the other side of their scheme, not just intact, but improved. Not just unbroken, but upgraded. Not just aware, but awakened. And they have to live with the knowledge that their greatest attempt to destroy you became the very